There's a game so rare, the company that made it literally can't sell it to you. It sold out back in 1998 in 2 days flat, and then somewhere over the years they lost the thing entirely. And it still turns up on lists of the greatest RPGs ever made. We'll get to that one last because it's the worst. Before it, 4 other games that got some of the best reviews of their generation and sold like nobody was supposed to find them. Going in, the obvious assumption is that these flopped because they earned it. Too weird, too niche, too much work. Mostly, no. The games were good, and I say that as someone who's actually finished several of these myself, and one of them is still one of my favorite games I've ever played. What buried them was a dead console, or a launch week, or a studio that shut its doors before the game even shipped. The other 4 will take oldest to newest, starting in 1995. Terranigma. Made in 1995 by a studio called Quintet. It's the 3rd game in a loose trilogy with Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia, and the premise is hard to describe without sounding like I'm making it up. You play a kid named Ark who resurrects the entire planet. He raises the continents up off the sea floor, brings back the plants, then the animals, then the human race. And then he watches civilization grow up and start behaving exactly as badly as you'd expect. It's an action RPG with Zelda-style dungeons. Commercially, it was modest, quiet in Japan, nowhere near Final Fantasy numbers. In Europe, where Nintendo published it, it found its people and became a cult classic. Never a hit, just the kind of game nobody who played it ever forgot. And the Americas? The Americas got nothing. By the time the English version was finished, Enix had already closed its US branch, since the earlier games had sold badly, so there was no company left to put it out here. And that English version everyone in Europe played? The translation was written by Nintendo of America. America did the work. America translated the whole game. And then America didn't release it in America. So there was an entire Terranigma in English that for anyone living in the Americas in 1996 was real and impossible at the same time. And thanks to the Super Nintendo's region lock, importing the European cartridge didn't save you either. It wouldn't run on a console over here. It's never been re-released. Not on Wii, not on Switch, nowhere. Because the rights turned into a knot nobody's felt like untying in 30 years. Quintet slowly stopped making games and vanished so quietly that fans still don't really know what happened to them. Their masterpiece goes for a few $100s on eBay, when it shows up at all. That's the re-release. Next one's from Square, and in 2000, Square was one of the biggest studios on Earth, and doing great. Vagrant Story came out that year on the PlayStation, directed by Yasumi Matsuno, made by a lot of the Final Fantasy Tactics team. And in Japan, it did something almost nothing does. It got a perfect score in Famitsu, 40 out of 40. To put that in perspective, across the entire life of the original PlayStation, with every Final Fantasy, every Metal Gear, every Resident Evil that came out on it, exactly 1 game got that score. This one. So a top-tier studio makes a game so good that the Japanese magazine, famous for hating to give high scores, gives it a 10 across the board. And then it sells like something nobody's ever heard of. Around 100,000 copies in its first weeks at home. For a Square game with a perfect score, that's a flop. 2 reasons. First, Square never gave it a decent marketing push. Second, Square was busy advertising everything else. Vagrant Story landed right in the middle of one of the most crowded stretches in Square's own history. Between 1999 and 2001, the company dropped heavyweight after heavyweight. Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, Chrono Cross, Final Fantasy X, all bigger, all louder, all much easier to sum up on a poster. Vagrant Story is the one where fighting means freezing time, tagging specific parts of an enemy's body, and chaining hits on a meter that then punishes you for chaining too many. It's brilliant. It is not a sentence that fits on a bus. So it got drowned out by its own siblings, and a masterpiece became the black sheep of a company too busy making money to notice. third one is about moving into the wrong house. Baten Kaitos came out on the GameCube in 2003, made by Monolith Soft, who just finished Xenosaga together with a studio called Tricrescendo. And the reason they made it is the whole story. The GameCube barely had any Japanese RPGs. Monolith looked at that empty shelf and thought, somebody's gotta fill this, and decided that somebody would be them. A big, ambitious, genuine JRPG for the one Nintendo console that didn't have one. And the game is strange in the best way. Everything in the world is a card. Your sword is a card. Your potion is a card. Your attacks are cards. Your lunch is a card. And if you don't eat it, it rots and turns into a different card. And you play all of it in real time before a timer runs out, like a fighting game that had a kid with a deck of poker. And you're not even the hero. You're a guardian spirit floating over the main character's shoulder, and every so often the characters turn to the camera and talk directly to you. There's just one flaw in the plan. The GameCube didn't have Japanese RPGs because the people who bought Japanese RPGs had bought a PlayStation 2. So Monolith cooked the perfect meal for a table that had already left the restaurant. It sold less than Tales of Symphonia, the other RPG Namco put on the GameCube, around the same time. The audience wasn't there. It was in the next room, on a different machine. They made a second one anyway, a prequel in 2006, and it sold even worse. A third got planned and quietly killed before it started. But that team was fine. In the narrative, a few years later, Nintendo bought Monolith Soft outright, and the studio that made the RPG nobody bought on the GameCube now makes Xenoblade, our masterpiece, and quietly helps build Zelda. So Baten Kaitos didn't get its franchise. The people who made it got everyone else's. And the games themselves didn't stay stuck on the GameCube forever. In 2023, both of them came back in an HD remaster on Switch and later on Steam. Fourth one is about timing. Residents of Fate in Japan End of Eternity came out in 2010, made by Tri-Ace, the Star Ocean and Valkyrie profile people, published by Sega. It's an RPG where you don't fight with swords or magic, you fight with guns. 3 mercenaries, an obscene amount of ammo, and a combat system where you sprint in slow motion firing mid-jump. It's as fun as it sounds. And it takes about 10 hours to understand, which is less fun. And it wasn't a total wipeout. It sold well below expectations, but it didn't sink, except below expectations for an RPG this size with the budget it had is the number that doesn't get a sequel. I'd have bet the problem with the difficulty, and it is hard. The tutorial is basically a part-time job, but difficulty isn't what killed it. The date did. Tri-Ace brought this one to Sega instead of their usual Square Enix. Reasonable plan, right up until you look at what else came out that March. March 9th, Final Fantasy XIII, the biggest launch the series had ever had. March 16th, Residents of Fate. Also, March 16th, the exact same day, God of War 3, which moved over 1 million copies in about 5 days, wedged between the 2 biggest releases of the year. It never had a chance. It never got a sequel. Tri-Ace never made anything like it again, and there's a lesson in there about release dates that Sega paid for. Years later, in 2018, a remaster came out. Today on Steam, the reviews are very positive. People came back, played it slowly, and finally saw what Sega had in its hands in 2010. It showed up late, but it showed up. Which brings us to the last one, and it's the only one that actually tried to win. Back in the mid-90s, Sega watched Final Fantasy VII go to the PlayStation and help sync the Saturn. And it landed on the most logical response imaginable. Make its own Final Fantasy on the Saturn. So it took Team Andromeda, its in-house studio, the people who'd made the Panzer Dragoon rail shooters, and told them to turn that world into a full RPG, one good enough to win the console war. The plan was to sell 1.5 million copies. And that's not me guessing. That was the official target. And they almost pulled off the impossible part. Panzer Dragoon Saga is a fully 3D, fully voiced RPG on the Sega Saturn, a console that had no business running any of it. Spread across 4 discs where you fly a dragon that circles and tilts around enemies in a combat system that still remembers it used to be a rail shooter. It came out in 1998 with the best reviews any Saturn game had gotten. It's one of the highest rated games on the whole system. But by 1998, the Saturn was a corpse. Sega had lost the console war, moved on to the Dreamcast, and stores didn't want Saturn games taking up shelf space. So Sega, the same company that had ordered this game specifically to sell 1.5 million copies, printed a few thousand in Europe, around 20,000 in America, and let it die quietly. Final Fantasy VII, the game it was built to beat, sold nearly 10 million. Panzer Dragoon Saga sold around 20,000. And then it got worse, because the developers lost the game's source code. That thing I told you about at the start? That's this. It's why the best RPG on the Saturn has never been re-released, can't be ported anywhere without a fight, and to this day basically exists as an original disc. Search eBay right now and you'll find copies for over $400. How a company loses its own finished game is a whole other disaster, and I get into that one in the canceled sequels video up there. Sega set out to make a game to win a war, lost the war, and then lost the game. 5 great games. 1 nobody was allowed to buy, 1 its own owner buried, 1 on the wrong console, 1 in the wrong week, and 1 Sega barely printed. None of them failed because they were bad. If any of these games made you want to play them, like the video and subscribe. Every week we talk about RPGs and JRPGs. See you next time.